friends, and welcome to episode 1.3 of the Gorgeous Gourds series. In the last episode, you learned how to take values 1 through 10 and use them to show both a light source and to help simple shapes look more three-dimensional. We're going to be taking those same concepts and applying them to a more difficult thing to draw. We are focusing on drawing a pumpkin in this episode. So I'm going to break down the steps of how you're going to complete this drawing, starting with the line drawings of the pumpkin and working all the way up to the values that we're adding to make it look as realistic as possible. So we're going to break this down, we're going to work through these steps together, and I think that it will really be helpful for the project that we're going to be completing during this unit. So let's get started. The first step is to begin by just giving yourself the outline of the shape and by drawing in the basic shape of the stem. Now the stem comes up and I can give myself this little top part to help make my angles easier to figure out for the bottom of the stem. And then it starts to get a little bit thicker. And then we've got this line that comes out and up. Next, we're going to add in the sections. Now, I'm going to begin by noticing that there's a little dip in the middle here. Then there's also a top of the stem, and then a line that goes along the edge that kind of leads out to that little part that dips down. So I'm going to just put my finger on this line to make sure I'm really paying attention, because I'd say one of the biggest mistakes that students make is that their brain will say, like, we know what a pumpkin looks like, and that's when you get like this thing going on. So we're really focusing on drawing what we see. So I'm putting my finger on that line. Notice that it kind of comes out and rounds out underneath this shape. Now this line comes out a little bit before the end of the stem here. So I'm gonna just draw this line, putting my finger on it still. Now this next line starts with that little indicator line that we drew from our first step. So this comes out, and notice that it touches the next section right about here. So it doesn't come down to the same point. So I can even start by kind of rounding out this little bit to match that round shape. This line kind of comes out, and now I'm really paying attention to the shape of this section in between, and it's pretty like pointed where it connects and then pretty evenly thick around. Now over here, same thing, it starts with this little line that we gave ourselves, and you can see that it touches like right about here. It doesn't come all the way down. So I can again start by giving myself this little rounded section underneath. Now I'm gonna put my finger here so I can see the shape. And this one kind of comes up for a bit more of a bump here, and then comes straight down. Now this next section starts here. It does not start at the stem, and that's something that people get tricked by all the time. So just be careful that you're paying attention. And I'm gonna just have that curve out a bit more. This one kind of tucks in. Now our next section touches the base of this stem. So we're gonna add that little line. And then this section just touches the end of the stem right here before it kind of dips in a little and then comes out to meet that one. Now I'm gonna come back to this section right here. So it's coming from the bottom, and then it arches and touches the stem just right about here. And I'm really paying attention to the angle that this is drawn at. So I'm trying to just sketch that out at the same angle. And then I have my last little section right here, and I notice it dips in just a little, so I made that happen. Now we're going to go through and just kind of start adding in the sections for where our value is going to be really showing. So that's what these lines are, is where your value is coming from and what sections it's filling in. So you'll notice that in the final example of this picture, there's a line that kind of comes down about halfway, and that this darker value starts about here and kind of comes up and around. That same dark value section starts just about here and comes around. So we're just starting to sketch in those sections of darker value. So now this section is darker and kind of comes up and then around again. And this kind of comes up and around. Now over here, we have a section that kind of starts up at this top area and comes down to about here. Now on this area, we have a highlight right here, but a lot of this is actually pretty dark. So we're gonna outline the highlight instead and show ourselves where this dark is beginning, which is pretty much this whole section. Then over here, it starts just about on this edge and then wraps around here. We've got quite a lot of it in this section, but it has a highlight right there. Now that we've got our values sketched in of where they're going to go, they start by filling in the lighter values and then working their way up to the dark. So we are going to begin by actually starting with the dark and then working our way out to the light, the way that we have been doing for all of the value scales that we've drawn so far. So I recommend looking at this 6th step, and you're going to just find your darkest values starting with number 10. So I am working with an HB pencil just because this one is so small and it's easier for me to get those finer details with a small pencil. So I just wanted to point that out to you. So I'm going to start with my darker values, and I'm going to come down through here, and this whole section of the stem is pretty much my 10 and sort of like a 9. So I'm filling in this section, and then I notice that it does start to fade here. So I'm gonna just get lighter along that area, and then I'm gonna fade out to the white. Now I'm continuing to look for my other darkest areas, and I see that like right along here is the base shadow. So I'm still using my finger. It's like when you first learn to read, you have to follow along, because otherwise you get sort of lost because it's a new skill that you're learning. I think that drawing is the same. I follow along with my finger all the time, even though I've been drawing forever. I can see that I've added that darker section, but it kind of connects here and then comes out. I'm filling in my medium tone, and I did start with my HB, which I know is a little bit different from what we've been doing, but I do think it's helpful when you're working in small areas, and I'm just fading this out because I know that that's what happens in this area. I'm going to look for the darker sections in my pumpkin. This is not a number 10, it's maybe a 9 or an 8. So I'm going to begin by, again, still holding my finger there so I can see where I'm at, and I'm paying really close attention to the fact that it gets lighter along the bottom edge here, that this line continues all the way up and is sort of slanted back towards the stem, so I'm really trying to capture that, and that it has more of like a triangular shape here. But I'm trying not to fill it in all the way because there's a very subtle little highlight down at the bottom. And then I'm continuing this and getting a little bit lighter as I work my way out towards this part where it kind of tips up. Now remember that we are still able to use our blending stump, so I'm gonna fill in all of my darker values all the way up to my 5 before I come in with my blending stump. So I'm gonna skip over to here where it does start at about an 8, and it has this little edge that kind of wraps up. It does have a bit of a section here that I didn't quite add in yet, And then through here it gets a little bit darker. We've got more of an 8 right along this edge. That transitions to like a 7 and a 6, quickly to a 5, to show that this is like a little highlight. So I'm going to come in, add in this shadow here. And I'm saving all of my 5 and 4 and 3 values for using my blending stump with. I do have a bit of a 5 here, I guess, that I can add. Now I'm skipping over to this section, and I can see that the darkest edge is probably right here. So I'm going to come in and add that first. And I see that right through here, it starts to fade out. And I do have like a bit of a darker patch here, so I'm actually going to add that kind of like diagonally. And then I have a little bit of like a highlight here, but it's got like a little highlight down at the base here as well, just right about there. Now for this section, I'm going to come up, shade that in with my probably like a 6. It's a little lighter, but still on the medium side for sure. And I see that this also has a bit of an edge. So I'm filling that in. This also kind of comes down at that same angle. It's really light. And I noticed that this value is about an 8, maybe a 9 in the corner, and then it fades, gets a little bit lighter. It's kind of darker through this diagonal space. A little bit lighter right there, so I'm going to leave that patch. And this does get just a little bit darker as we move over. And then we've got a medium tone. And then this highlight is really bright along this edge, so I'm going to make sure that I'm not going into that space at all. I've got about a 5 coming through here, so I am going to just add that a little. Now moving on to this next section, it starts off a bit darker over here. And just kind of continues with that medium tone all the way through. And then it does connect here, doesn't leave that highlight, but it's a little bit lighter, and then it fades. It gets a little bit lighter as we go down. Now this section up here has a bit of a shadow kind of coming up, and then a little shadow in between, and then this has a bit of a shadow as well. There's a little shadow in between. Then this is darker on the side where there's the stem, and then it has the highlight. So now we're going to switch to working with our blending stump. So I'm going to first just check it to see how much is on it, maybe even remove some so that I don't start out too dark. And again, I'm just going to go through and work on shading my lightest areas first and then working towards my darker spaces. So I'm going to begin on this section here. So I can see that this is a bit darker here. I'm going to fade out on that little section, bringing in some medium tone here. Gonna press a little bit darker here. Okay, now I'm gonna come along this edge where this is a bit darker. I'm gonna leave that little highlight down at the bottom and kind of bring up this little detail. Then I'm adding in this value, which is like my 3. And I'm gonna leave this little highlight up here at the top. Now I'm gonna come over to this section, blend that out. And again, my only real highlight is at this little arch. So I'm just gonna leave that part white and that's all. Same with over here, I'm leaving this little edge light. Now I'm on this part here. Now I'm here, going a little bit light at the top, getting a bit darker on the side, and then fading out to our highlight on this edge here. And then it does get a bit lighter as we work our way down. And then this is one of the darker sections of our pumpkin. And it comes at a diagonal. And then we've got this section that's a little bit lighter through here. So I'm kind of leaving just a bit of a highlight there, just a little. And then this is like a solid 4. And then this is our last section. And again, this is pretty dark as well. We've got this edge that kind of comes down diagonally. And again, leaves just a little bit of a highlight in this section. Then this section is a bit darker than it is here. Now that we've got that done, I'm going to come back through with my HB and I'm going to just reinforce some of these section lines. And I'm just adding another darker layer to some of the spots that kind of lost their detail. So like this little edge kind of comes up. I might come back through and like redraw this little line here. Curving that around. This kind of comes up and goes out a little bit more. A little bit darker through here. Just going back through and adding some of, there you go. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch these steps. I hope it was helpful and that you were able to create a realistic looking pumpkin. So I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching.